Yeah, I'll react to that, sure.
Saab. Now,
Saab.
military aviation history, and today I'm in Linköping in Sweden visiting Saab. Now,
I remember. Hi guys, how are you? Sorry, I got distracted. Good, I hope. I remember that was the first car I remember my dad having when I was a kid, and then they just disappeared, and I didn't. And a friend of mine's dad in the neighborhood had one, and then I just stopped seeing them, like early 2000s, and apparently they've just been making jet aircraft. So let's go, let's learn preemptive. Like, I do not know a lot about planes at all, aviation, but I really enjoy trying to learn, and that's what we're going to do right now. Let's go.
they've put at our disposal a Gripen D. So I'm going to make this video into sort of a Gripen CD inside the cockpit walkaround, although of course this is an aircraft that is being active service, so we can't actually jump inside of the aircraft and film all the bits and bobs.
That makes sense.
Instead of that, we're going to have some simulator footage of me jumping inside a simulator as a little bit of a compensation for all of you, and it's of course already accessible for all patrons and channel members. Now just a bit
Wait a second, is that part of the simulation, or do they actually have this sort of screen?
and it's of course already accessible for all patrons and channel members.
Watch
Now, just
Netflix?
a bit of a disclaimer here. I was invited to Saab
Yeah, I'll
to film
react to
this.
that,
However,
sure.
There is absolutely
My God, guys, this is a crap show.
Jacobites
No, stop it. That was another one of my videos I just finished watching, Jacobite Rebellion.
Now, just a bit of a disclaimer here. I was invited to Saab to film this. However, there is absolutely no transaction happening in terms of money being sent my way. This is not a sponsorship. Inside the Cockpit is, of course, fully funded by patrons and channel members. So with that disclaimer out of the way, as always, veterans of Inside the Cockpit will know first the walk around. We'll start on the nose. We'll take it around the starboard side, coming around the tail, and then we'll talk about the weapon systems being installed on Gripen C or D on the port side. So starting up front, we've got a pressure sensor with some complementary vortex generators here, and then in the radome we have the PSO5A radar set. Now, as Gripen has already been in service for some time, there's of course certain iterations of this radar set that have come out, but it's basically a multi-mode pulse Doppler radar set operating in the X band, and the azimuth is roughly plus and minus 60 degrees. Coming further, then of course we have the cockpit.
Guys, if anyone does know what they're talking about here, has any knowledge, I'd really appreciate any answers to any of the questions I'm bound to have.
It's roughly plus and minus 60 degrees. Coming further, then of course we have the cockpit. The D model is a twin-seater, so you of course see that the second tandem seat there. We've got the landing gear up front with one of the landing lights as well, a couple of antennas here that do their job, and then of course we come to the engine air intake. Gripen CD features a single RM12 that produces roughly 12,000 pounds of thrust. In afterburner that goes up to 18,000 pounds of thrust. And when it comes to, of course, all these sort of stats and figures, it's easy to compare to other aircraft, but of course what you always have to do is keep in mind what are the specifications for the actual aircraft, what is the role it is intended to fill. And
I got to make sure just to ask my question because I miss out on stuff if I wait. When it says 18,000 pounds of force, is that what he said? What does that mean? Does that mean, like, 18,000 pounds? Yeah, just what does that mean exactly?
What are the specifications for the actual aircraft? What is the role it is intended to fill? And not just make an off-the-record comparison there between different aircraft. For example, with the Euro Canards, of course, your Typhoon and Rafale, we're sitting at a slightly lower thrust-to-weight ratio, but Gripen still does its job. So in that sense, it's all good. We then come to the all-moving Canards. These are close coupled, so that means they sit slightly above and very close to the actual wings. Now, they have quite a few features. First of all, they can move independently from each other, but generally they move in unison. And they, of course, generate vortices that then also interact with the wing vortices that re-energize the boundary layer to prevent sort of that separation of the airflow from going across the whole wing. As well as that, at high angles of attack, they deflect that re-energize, generate vortices that then also interact with the wing vortices that re-energize the boundary layer to prevent sort of that separation of the airflow from going across the whole wing.
So did he just say that this right here is used to break up the wind a bit so that it doesn't evenly go on the whole wing?
To prevent sort of that separation of the airflow from going across the whole wing.
Oh, no. It's to make it. So how does that separate the airflow? What's wrong with the air just hitting it?
As well as that, at high angles of attack, they deflect and bring additional airflow over the wing. And of course, on landing, they deflect automatically to act as air brakes, giving Gripen that distinctive look when it lands on the ground.
So that forces more wind to hit the wing than otherwise would have if it weren't redirected by those upper wing flaps he was just showing.
You giving Gripen that distinctive look when it lands on the ground. In Gripen, you also have a couple of fuel tanks in the spine of the aircraft, so there's 5 tanks there. Although tank number 1 and tank number 2 are separated in fore and aft compartments, so basically you could say the spine or the center line of the aircraft has 5 fuel tanks, and then there's of course a fuel tank in the leading edge of the wing, and also one additional one to the aft part of the wing. Looking briefly here in this area, we've got the refueling panel as well with the refueling coupling over here, so that's where you would put it in and screw it tight in order to refuel the aircraft. And then we come of course to the actual wing, to the leading edge. We've got the full-on gear in the back of course that retracts forward and inwards. And then on the wings we have maneuvering flaps that do their job once required, and then we come of course to the wingtip launcher. Weapon systems, I'm going to handle those on the port side. For now, what's important is forward facing radar warning antenna and a rearward facing as well to provide some of that protection for Gripen.
Wait, you guys use port, starboard, what is it, bow stern? You use boat terminology for directions on planes?
And a rearward facing as well to provide some of that protection for Gripen. Then as we come around those wingtip launchers, the ailerons providing the control for the pilot in order to steer the aircraft. Of course, their Gripen features a fly-by-wire system, so these are these are controlled by actuator rods with the control input coming from the pilot. Coming towards the tail, then we've got our actual air brake.
Wait, guys, so these flaps are used, I thought they were used for lift and for the opposite of lift. I thought it was more for this motion, but it's actually when you put the flaps down on one wing, then it's for turning rather than for increasing or lowering lift. Well, that's what it does. I know that. Just, do you get what I mean?
So these are controlled by actuator rods with the control input coming from the pilot. Coming towards the tail, then we've got our actual air brakes that sit on either side on the tail end of the aircraft. And of course we have a tailless aircraft, which means that we have no horizontal stabilizer and simply a vertical stabilizer. Up there we have an ILS antenna, we have a forward-facing radar warning antenna, we have another pressure sensor, and so on and so forth. And I just remembered that I forgot to also explain that, of course, with the Canards, because Gripen features relaxed stability, those make automatic adjustments for the pilot in order to maintain that stability for the flight. We have then the variable area nozzle exhaust towards the back, and then as we come around the aircraft towards the wing root here, we find the aircraft's APU. Gripen also features a lot of countermeasure systems in terms of chaffs and flares, so there's different launcher systems that can be installed either at the the trailing edge of the actual pylons, or that can also be installed here towards the variable area nozzle exhaust that fire off, of course, flares and chaff when required. Coming then to the wingtip launcher, what we have in Gripen is basically, up over here we have IR homing missiles, so air-to-air missiles. Initially, Sweden used a lot of AIM-9, so either the RB-24 and the earlier iterations, the upgraded versions were then called RB-74. And of course, Gripen has mainly transitioned now to IRIS-T, which is RB-98. In Sweden, the designations work the following way. RB stands for robot, which means missile, and the number stands for the actual version of the missile, with even numbers being IR homing missiles and uneven numbers being radar-guided missiles. Bringing it around then to the outboard pylon and the inboard pylon. So these are of course NATO compatible even before Sweden took the decision to join NATO. By the way, welcome. But on the outside we have a carrying capacity of roughly 1,300 pounds.
Oh yeah, guys, I know. I gotta watch a video on that. That Turkey finally relinquished, right? What was the deal? Like they wanted U.S. fighter jets or something?
Sweden took the decision.
So welcome, guys,
to join NATO. By the way, welcome. But on the outside we have a carrying capacity of roughly 1,300 pounds. On the inboard one, roughly 2,600 pounds. Then we have a offset centerline starboard pylon to the front of the aircraft that carries 500 pounds, but that's mainly for targeting pods or reconnaissance pods. And then we have a centerline pod in the back, mainly mainly for fuel tanks or also a recce pod. Now, Gripen features, of course, a lot of...
Fuel tanks or what? Something pod?
Mainly for fuel tanks or also a recce pod. Now, Gripen features, of course, a lot of weapon systems. I can't go into all of them, but for air-to-air engagements, we have AMRAAM missiles like the AIM-120, that's RB-99, or we have Meteor, RB-101. Before that, Sweden also used a lot of Skyflash, so RB-71. Then there's Taurus, there's anti-shipping missile, RBS-15, and so on, that can all be installed on these pylons. Of course, you can also have laser-guided bombs with Pavray 2. You can have glide munitions, drop bombs, and all that good stuff as well. Coming then towards the front of the aircraft, I of course already pointed out the fact that they can have targeting pods and reconnaissance pods on the outboard starboard forward pylon. But over here, not in Gripen D, but in Gripen C, we would also find a refueling pod as well as the forward fixed weaponry, which is a 27mm Mauser BK-27 cannon. You might be familiar with that cannon. It's also used on the Typhoon and on Tornado. It fires a 27 by 145mm round. It's a 5-chamber revolver gun and has a variable fire rate of roughly 1,000 to 1,700 rounds a minute. And with 120 rounds, that gives the pilot roughly 7 to 4 embedded.
So is that like the gun that's on the you know the one I'm talking about? Warthog. A10 Warthog. I think I just got it. Is that one? The I probably look pretty dumb.
Seconds of fire, and that would be housed, well, upwards from front to the front here, but not installed on Delta. So yeah, that brings us to a close on the outside of Gripen. I hope you enjoyed this tour. Big thank you, of course, to the patrons and channel members who make this possible. Also, of course, to Saab for the invitation. And if you want to jump inside the cockpit with me, of course, look out for that video that we have of the full fidelity simulator filmed later on during the day. So thanks very much. Have a great day and see you in the sky.
Thank you. In the sky, I don't... Yeah, guys, at first I was like, oh, ooh, in the cockpit. And then he's like, oh, we can't actually go in the cockpit. I'm like, but this actually turned out to be a really great video, honestly. Really cool. Saab, cars to jets. Or maybe they're doing jets too when they were doing cars. I'd really appreciate, guys, all comments, but especially if you take the time to answer any of my questions. I really appreciate that. Thank you. And I'll see you guys next time, all right? Bye, guys.